their cohorts in both the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party. Friends, it is in both groups that we're facing this threat. I don't know if you were paying attention, but in New York, in the 23rd, that the Republican Party stood foursquare behind a woman who did not believe in the conservative values that you and I believe in, and they supported her financially. What was that? What was that, folks? Let me tell you what that was. That was playing politics. So what we have is a threat in both parties, and don't you dare forget that. I want you to know that one of the things that we need to do in the Texas Tea Parties is that we need to be involved, engaged in the process. And this process requires of us a vetting of those to whom we select to go and represent us in Washington, D.C. I submit to you that there's three things that we ought to be looking for. Number one, do they believe in the unalienable rights given to us by God? That's got to be the first criteria. Number two, they must believe and defend the Constitution of the United States. And number three, they've got to be conservative. They've got to be conservative. What we mean by conservative, what I mean by conservative is that they believe in the first two criteria. That's what I mean. So what we are experiencing in this administration, I want you to pay attention here, is a rapid-fire attempt to implement a socialistic philosophy that first seeks to dispossess and replace our Judeo-Christian heritage with a philosophy that's shaped in secular humanism, framed in atheistic godlessness, and birthed out of a Darwinistic Marxism. That's what it is, folks. If you need to call it what it is, in order for you to fight against it, you gotta know what it is. Otherwise, we're groping and trying to figure out what they're doing to us. And since the beginning of this administration, we have witnessed crises after crises. Crises in the mortgage business, crises in the finance and banking business, crises in the automotive business, crises in the health care, and God knows what else is going to happen next week. Another crisis is going to happen. My friends, these crises, don't you find them to be unusual? I'm 57 years old, and I've never seen anything like this in all my days. Crises after crises after crises. My friends, I submit to you, that is not an accident or happenstance. This stuff is orchestrated. All these crises are designed to blow your mind. These crises are but distractions that keep us from seeing their real agenda, which is to enlarge government's control over our lives. The founding fathers saw this as the tyranny of big government. However, may I say to you that these crises are not what we should be paying attention to at this time. There is something more sinister that's happening behind the shadows of each of these crises. These crises only serve to distract the public from the more deadly transformation being forced onto this great republic. The unseen maneuvering that represents the greatest danger to our freedom is their effort to remove the influence of our Judeo-Christian heritage and the evidence to dispossess God out of the public square and out of American history. Folks, that's what's happening. Let me just say this off script. That we in America have put our emphasis in the wrong place. And this Tea Party movement will fail if it does not get its perspective right. Although we're experiencing a manufactured crisis in our economy, there's no question about it. Somebody's manipulating the economy to produce a deadly result. And there's no question about it. Our liberties are at jeopardy right now. They're in jeopardy. But the greater threat is the dispossession of our Christian heritage. If you remove the absolutes from our culture, what do we have? That question was asked and answered by Francis Schaeffer back in 1981, who saw it coming. And he says, when you remove the Judeo-Christian heritage from our culture, you have a power elite who will arbitrarily determine what's right and what is wrong. And that is oftentimes determined by circumstances. And so what is circumstantially true today for the relativists may not be true tomorrow. And so what they may change today, they'll change tomorrow to something different. And what they're changing today contradicts our Judeo-Christian heritage. The immutable truths that are found within the Word of God. God created marriage. Amen. And He defines it as one man and one woman. But in the mind of the relativists, it can change every moment. And so, folks, this is something very serious here. And I'm going to tell you, if you want God's help, God bless America. Now, I'll talk about that in a moment. This administration is studied in Saul Alinsky. This president, Barack Hussein Obama, is not a dummy. Yes, he uses a teleprompter. And he wears nice suits. But he is not an empty suit. Don't you dare believe that. Some of you like to tease him about that, but this man is an ideologue. He knows what he's doing, and he knows where he's going. He knows what he's doing, and he knows where he's going. And he is just the front man for an evil oligarchy that's behind him, making sure that he gets everything he needs to do what he needs to do. America, wake up. This administration is studying Saul Alinsky. Radical belief that seeks to replace our current form of government with one that contradicts the principles established in the Declaration of Independence. That is the protection of our liberties and the restraint of tyranny. The tyranny of big government. Their strategy now in light of an impotent resistance. And I just come from Washington, D.C. I was there with Michelle Obama. And I stood on the platform with all of these Republican congressmen, to which I desire to be one day. And I listened to what these guys had to say as they stood there and played politics. I mean, and represented their speech. To almost 50,000 Americans showed up on a short notice from Michelle. And as I stood there and watched this group, I recognized that this is the most impotent group of men I've ever seen in my life. Listen, I was looking at a group of guys who were like a bird whose wings had been clipped. You know, a whole lot of movement and going nowhere. You know, I mean, you know what I'm talking about. We know what mark-time march is, don't we? That's just standing in one spot doing like this. There's a lot of energy being expended here. There's energy, but it's energy that's producing nothing, right? I'm just mark-time marching. What you want to do is march and get it done. But this group is impotent because they don't have the numbers to do anything. And so they're being bum rushed every day. All they can do is stand up and holler and scream. Don't do this. And I said to myself, this has happened to America because most Americans went to sleep in the last election cycle. We got angry, we got frustrated, and we threw in our stewardship responsibilities to protect our liberties. Got mad and turned it over to a bunch of Bolsheviks, Marxists, communists. Their strategy now, in light of an impotent resistance, is to manufacture rapid fire crises in order to force change in our economy, our government, and in our way of life. Professor Richard Plowden and Professor Francis Piven first developed this strategy in the 1960s. Both were deeply inspired by Saul Alinsky.